If you're wondering why I've waited a little longer to put this one out than normal, well, it's simple. While I could just briefly generalise all my points to being how the film either succeeds or fails without giving anything away, the only way to explain where X-Men Days of Future Past succeeds or fails is to explain what happens in the film, and by now I feel that enough people have or should have seen it for me to just go ahead and put a minor spoiler warning here. So are you all ready? Okay, good. Here's a bit of perspective. In 2000 and then again in 2003, Bryan Singer made a couple of X-Men films. One was good and one was great. Both more or less juggled the characters well, had some good action sequences and effects, and while he took liberties with the source material in some areas and completely rewrote characters in others, Singer always stayed focused on telling his own story, developing the characters he'd set up, and taking it all seriously, which I've always admired. While now we're much luckier in having superhero films which fully embrace the colours finally, that doesn't mean Singer's X-Men films aren't still worth your time. When watched with some historical perspective, it's easy to understand why the black leather and straight-faced approach felt necessary at the time. But what remained was that at the core, the two films continued to provide good social commentary in the disguise of big action superhero flicks, which rang true to what the X-Men had always been about. Was there a little too much Wolverine? Well, now there is, but back then, Singer was actually putting the character through a two-movie arc of discovering who he was, and had plans to focus on Cyclops and his leadership in the third installment. But then something happened. A door opened for a Superman sequel and Singer ran off to go make that, leaving none other than Brett Ratner to take charge. Once in the director's seat, he decided to, let's just say things didn't go very well. Then with X-Men Origins Wolverine, things didn't get any better. Then in 2011, Matthew Vaughn showed that there was still life to be found in the franchise with X-Men First Class, a flawed but good overall movie focusing on the origins of younger Professor X and Magneto. It was pretty good as its own self-contained flick, however I don't quite think it's as good as everyone says it is, or rather I don't think it stands particularly well as an X-Men movie considering no one remembers anyone that was not Xavier and Magneto, and maybe Mystique and Beast in that movie. But what was good and resonated big time was the execution of Charles and Eric's friendship and how they wound up going down different paths. Nevertheless, it was fun, well made, and the castings of McAvoy and Fassbender in the lead roles were inspired choices. Then there was the Wolverine, and that was pretty good too, though nothing earth-shattering. Looking back on all of it, even the most die-hard of fans will admit that the X-Men series is probably the most disjointed and inconsistent set of films since the Rocky franchise, and its constant fluctuation in quality and seemingly desperate attempt to stay alive without getting rebooted hasn't made this whole thing an easy ride. And X-Men Days of Future Past is the first in the series to openly acknowledge this, and is the first time the filmmakers have tasked themselves with such an enormous undertaking: to fix it all. To fix the twisted and nonsensical continuity between the films, to make up for all the bad in the franchise, to bring the two generations casts together, because apparently after the Avengers every single studio has to highlight that their superhero properties have big universes to explore as well, and to also juggle an excessive amount of characters throughout a complex time travel plot, all whilst holding together its very cohesion. And not only have they surprisingly, almost unfathomably pulled it off, the movie is also kind of awesome. Remember that awfully tired, depressed feeling you had whilst walking out of X-Men 3? Well, imagine that here, but the complete opposite. The most thankful thing about X-Men Days of Future Past is that it keeps focused on what it should, telling a good story, developing its characters, and standing strong on its own above all else. It does so thanks to writer Simon Kinberg knowing what to focus on, successfully juggling all these plot points and weaving them together to make this seem a lot less packed than it actually is. The fact that they've also managed to correct a lot of the franchise's wrongdoings and open doors for a far more hopeful and exciting future along the way as well is simply icing on the cake. Take note, Sony, this is how it's done. Loosely based on the comic arc of the same name, we focus on what's left of the X-Men in a Terminator-esque post-apocalyptic future where mutants are on the edge of extinction as a result of being hunted down and killed by robot sentinels. In a last-ditch effort to stop the war before it ever begins, Wolverine's consciousness is sent back to 1973 to bring together a depressed younger James McAvoy Xavier and an imprisoned Michael Fassbender Magneto to stop Mystique from doing what will put all this terrible stuff in motion, killing Bolivar Trask and giving the government reason to spearhead his Sentinel project in the first place. This is really the first time Singer has nailed the right tone. With respect to his previous installments, there was always something quite self-ashamed about his first two projects. The grounded take always allowed the themes to be taken seriously, but it was always so damn hard to have fun with it all. This time he finally got it, having learnt from his mistakes and matured as a filmmaker after Superman Returns and Jack and the Giant Killer Slayer Beans. What was the movie called? He burst through the doors this time to take back his toys and do them justice, being a lot more competent in his direction of the action, finally moving away from his claustrophobic TV episode-like direction of X-Men's 1 and 2, and is a lot more self-assured with the tone, striking the better balance of seriousness and humour to carry the audience through an emotionally complex story. In order to make it feel coherent with the rest of the series, Singer makes the smart move in having the dark and serious stuff that we recognise appropriately present throughout the future scenes with the original cast, with mutant battles for survival, Holocaust imagery, and even a few deaths to show just how bad things are, and then throwing in all the light-hearted stuff in the 70s to match up well with First Class, with Whedon-style banter, some funny fish-out-of-water gags for Wolverine, and as I'm sure you've all heard, Quicksilver, who while frustratingly is only around for a scene or two without much of an explanation as to why, manages to steal the crowd by showing us that mutant powers can be really fun. He joins the gang for a hilariously enjoyable prison break sequence which gives Nightcrawler's White House opening in X2 a run for its money. And where the change from Kitty Pryde in the comic to Wolverine here may have at first come off as an excuse for him to be the main character of the story since he's the most marketable in these movies, and while I'm sure that's still a part of the reason, he's really the only member of the team that's developed all the right relationships to the characters throughout all the movies to make this work. Surprisingly though, this is the first time in a while where he actually doesn't steal the spotlight. Now all the wiser from the future war, we see a role reversal where he has to try and do what Xavier did for him back in X-Men 1, help him find his way. Wolverine may be the coach, but he's definitely not the player. In fact, he's all but taken out of the final fight. This is really Charles Xavier's movie, one that finally allows us to see and understand the turning point from James McAvoy to Patrick Stewart. When we first find him, he's but a shell of the man we all think we know. This time depressed after what happened over the last 10 years since First Class, and taking a medication created by Beast which allows him to walk but numbs his telepathic powers, McAvoy sells the hell out of it and walks away from this, as the actor that gives the most powerful performance of the ensemble. While it's all presented within a big action-oriented blockbuster, the ultimate hook comes down to what the X-Men have always been about, conflicting ideologies, this time with Xavier, Magneto, and even Mystique a little bit. Logan just about convinces Charles to help break Eric out of prison so that the two of them, being her past mentors, can find a way to stop Raven from killing Trask. Then thankfully, when it seems as if the film might come to a grinding halt due to all the best moments in the trailers having come and gone, in similar fashion to X2, just when it appears as if Magneto is being a little too heroic for the sake of the plot, he gets all the facts that he needs, realises what he has to do to benefit his cause, and puts his plan in motion no matter what it takes, in turn getting in the way of their mission and making things all the more difficult to overcome. The movie never loses sight of what the characters stand for, and the contrasting philosophies are constantly driving everyone's motivation. We also finally get to see mutants fighting with everything they've got. Amongst the new roster of surviving mutants is Bishop and Blink, and anyone who's ever played a Portal game is going to dig the hell out of her scenes. And it was also awesome to finally see Iceman be Iceman. And while the action is handled better in its execution and is the most visually creative this series of films has ever gotten, the overall finale served well as an involving character set piece with real stakes. It's not a perfect movie, however, there are quite a few, okay, is everyone following this, moments of time travel rule establishing to sit through. I would have liked McKellen's Magneto to get a little more to do, and I think Wolverine may have had to give the "I'm from the future" speech one too many times. You'd also have thought, what with being so focused on fixing continuity errors, that the movie itself would have the common sense to start by making sense, but there are in fact a good amount of "wait, what?" hiccups that take you out of things from the get-go. Wait, didn't Professor X die in The Last Stand? Didn't Wolverine lose his adamantium claws? Hang on, since when did walking through walls mean that Kitty Pryde could also send people back in time? And while it all works within the context of the story, some of the details in the script here feel like excuses more than anything else to have the conflict be a lot more difficult for our heroes to overcome. Like how things would have been so much easier if McAvoy's Professor X had his powers from the beginning, or if they'd asked Quicksilver to stay with them throughout the whole movie, or if Mystique listened to Charles in the first place, considering not much changes with that important decision besides 3 scenes of Charles going, "Please," and Mystique just going, "No, no." Okay, fine. Fortunately, what's important is in the overall scheme of things. The film's overall emotional core is so well realised that you kinda just roll with it by the end. But the big reason Days of Future Past works so well is because not only does it expand on what Matthew Vaughn so graciously set up with First Class, but its ending also finds a way to make this whole series feel like one cohesive storyline and match up with the film's overall theme: hope. Whereas once upon a time the first two X-Men felt as if it was one story building to something, and then The Last Stand kinda kicked us in the nuts and depressed us all with characters dying and just everything going horribly wrong, Days of Future Past poses an intriguing concept. What if it was all intentional? What if they did mean to kill off Jean, Cyclops and Xavier? What if Magneto and Mystique were meant to lose their powers? What if Wolverine was meant to wind up killing Jean and feeling bad about it for the rest of his life and going all hobo? What if this was all one timeline where everything just kept getting bleaker and bleaker, resulting in this desolate wasteland future? At one point, James McAvoy even reads Wolverine's mind and says, "I don't want your future." It suggests that this all had to happen in order for said hope to be restored to the whole cinematic universe itself, and as a result gives us a time-altering ending which almost seems like a fucking revelation. Yes, it's a bit of a bummer that we had to sit through Black Leather again, but it was all worth it to make this ending work. This is arguably the most comic book inspired ending done in a superhero movie. It trusts its audience to follow this, all to the point of just up and deciding to do a complete retcon of the series, now deleting all but First Class and Days of Future Past. Wow, that takes serious balls, and finally the X-Men films aren't restricted to where they can go. We can finally have more colourful costumes, new adventures to explore without everything feeling tired and worn out. Finally, we actually have a bright future for the franchise. But what's important is that while this all may originally have been conceived to clean up the timeline, Days of Future Past is a great movie in its own right. Funnily enough, it actually does what Amazing Spider-Man 2 didn't. It's funny how they're basically going for the exact same goal with trying to set a clear path for a franchise, but here they're actually interested in trying to tell a story and make a movie first and foremost amidst all that business stuff. I love this movie. I love the characters. I dug the hell out of any scenes where our characters slowed down and interacted. Isn't it great to see Wolverine and young Magneto actually sit down and have a conversation? I love the humour, I love the score, I love the direction, I adore the ending, and for the first time in around 10 years, I look forward to seeing where the franchise goes next. Cheers for watching guys, and as always if you like this video, you can subscribe to my channel.